Well, once again, Muslim terrorists
a terrorist
have slaughtered innocent
Islamic
people.
Extremists now control much of the country.
Their brand of justice is brutal and deadly.
Newsflash, America. These Muslim extremists are alive and well. They are not dead, and their video is not gratuitous, and it certainly is not irrelevant. It is a warning.
Welcome to the Truth About Muslims podcast, the official podcast of the Zwemer Center for Muslim Studies, where we help to educate you beyond the media. Here are your hosts, Howard and Trevor.
Today's episode is Homegrown Terrorist, terrorist in the United States.
Right, and our sponsors.
Sponsors this week, Columbia International University. Columbia educates people from a biblical worldview to impact the nations with the message of Christ.
And Zwemer Center.
Zwemer Center, as always, educating you beyond the media. Wait, that's us.
That is us. We educate beyond the media, but what does Zwemer Center do, Trevor?
The Zwemer Center has been equipping the church since 1979 to understand Muslims.
Before it was cool.
Before it was cool, yeah. 35 years of educating people to understand Muslims so that we can reach them with the gospel.
Glory.
All right, so Howard, this week you had an interesting encounter with an old friend.
Right, yeah, so this was really good because this kind of gives me the ability to kind of feel the pulse of the American populace.
Yeah, this is a story that's, it's anecdotal, it's our own experience, but at the same time, I think it's more true than we wish it was.
Right, and, so I'm just this normal guy, 37 years old, lives in America, grew up in the States.
Some Nazi dresser.
Thank you. Loves Jesus, and just trying to figure out how we fit, what we're supposed to do, what's our Christian response. And so I think there's a lot of people that kind of fit that demographic, especially on social media. So I talked to this guy and we, caught up, had a good time. And he just asked me what my thoughts on ISIS was. And
it's amazing that that's the conversation. You're sitting down with an old friend, and this is often the conversation with me, but I work in the context of teaching in a university setting about Islam, about Muslim-Christian relations. But I think it's not just because of what I do. I think everybody's talking about Islam. It's like the weather.
Yeah, it's on.
What are your thoughts on ISIS?
It's exciting, and it's in everyone's head, and there's a concern. So I think it's kind of a triple threat.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm talking to this guy. Right. I'm talking to this guy, and we just, kind of talk, and he just shared something that his pastor had posted on Facebook. And I don't remember all the details, but it just basically went where talking about support for arms against ISIS, which I get, that's kind of a thing, where, I think it's pretty standard. And because, it's a battle, there's a lot of atrocities that are happening. So, they're wanting to make a stand. Well, anyway, so this guy, this friend of mine, he posts back because he just, started to get close to this pastor. So he was kind of testing him out, feeling him out. So he makes this comment on there about how, we need to share the gospel with radical Muslims, but if that doesn't work, it might need to be a bullet. And of course, that brought me back to
Bill Robertson,
the beard, right?
Yeah, that's Duck Dynasty.
Right. And so I was kind of like mesmerized because at the same time, like, I'm not condemning my friend or even the pastor. I'm just thinking to myself, this is what I think normal Christians probably are at.
Yeah, this is the conversation happening. I think while we're making the Phil Robertson comment, the boom goes the dynamite section of the show, I think it might actually be the norm.
Right, because we were, and I don't know if this is just us, but we were kind of making fun of it because it was like so, ridiculous. I think a little bit over the top. Like Phil Robertson's going to go and take his shotguns and shoot some people, and I don't even think that people think of it that way. I think people are like, yeah, he's right.
No, I think a lot of people agreed with him, sadly.
Right. So that was my friend, and we had a great time talking. We didn't end up like arguing or anything like that, but it was really neat because I kind of shared my perspective, and I think that helped him a lot to kind of come away from, oh yeah, I forgot we're Christians.
Yeah, I think we easily forget because we're inundated with media all the time telling us that we should be afraid.
Right, and then we're also Americans, so we have guns and we can fight. Tell you what, and so yeah, I mean, I get that, but again, that Christian response going above and beyond, hating our enemies, but actually loving our enemies. So, yeah.
Well, that brings us to the media this week.
A lot of exciting stuff happening,
a lot going on. Oh, where do you start? I want to talk about Ebola. I don't know why, but Ebola and Muslims, I didn't even know they go together, but they do. We'll get to that later in the show.
Right. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's our Boom Goes the Dynamite section.
Right.
But first of all, we got to talk about there seems to be this epidemic.
It's coming.
All these American teenagers are leaving the United States and joining ISIS.
And we say all these very, very loosely because it's not really all these, but there is enough that it's kind of being a little concerning, I think.
It is bizarre.
Disconcerting.
Yeah, enough to make you uncomfortable.
Right. Like, what is going on? So, yeah, tell us, man.
Well, we had the one, this was a few weeks ago, the Chicago teen. What was the name? Muhammad Khan, right? From, I believe it was Pakistan, who went to, was attempting to fly to Syria to join ISIS. And so that was a little bit of a concern. Here you have this young adult. I wouldn't call him he's a teenager because he's, I believe he was 19 years old. I'm not sure. Howard, see if you can pull that up, the news report. But I believe he was a young adult, really. And
he was arrested at O'Hare Airport.
Right.
By the FBI.
And I believe it was his parents that turned him in, finding out what was going on and being concerned. But anyway, he was leaving the United States.
Yeah, he was 19. Muhammad Khan, yep.
Yeah. How did he get turned in? I'm going to make sure I'm getting these all. I want to make sure I have them all settled in my head because I know that's the next story we're going to talk about. Their parents turned him in. But how did he get caught? Does it say there in the article how he was caught?
He warned, he invited his family to join him in the 3-page letter.
Oh, that's right.
Which authorities found in his bedroom. Mm-hmm. And he warned them not to tell anybody about his travel plans.
Of course.
Right. But,
anyway.
I'm sure his family thought, what is happening? This is crazy.
No, nobody wants to see their kid kind of go down this path. But you know what? Again, like we said in the show before, it's a young age. You're searching for identity, a place to belong. He, like the others that we're going to talk about, encountered some ISIS propaganda on the internet and social media. Apparently, they are very good on social media. I can't figure out how they're getting away with this since social media is so public. But anyway, that's where he kind of encountered ISIS.
Yeah, like we talked about that with the girl from
Glasgow.
Right.
The bedroom radical. So that was the title of the article.
And crying.
That was the title of the article.
But how compelling their material must be.
Yeah. Well, like I say, it's not hard to convince a person to radicalize. You don't need a Quran to do it. It's more of a sociological phenomenon, and you use some propaganda, you develop a couple conspiracy theories that have just enough truth in them to make you convinced that you have to go and join the fight against the West. So anyway. And
then there was also that 19-year-old American nurse.
Yeah, again.
Yeah, what happened there?
Apparently ISIS, these guys are winsome because this is the second one that has gone to join ISIS as a bride. So she also met an ISIS fighter online. Do they have a dating website or something? I shouldn't joke, but it does it sounds very bizarre.
Right, because you're hearing about these brides that they're going for the bride. To be a bride. So she went who was arrested after trying to fight with ISIS alongside extremist boyfriend she met online.
Yeah, so again, this is a lot like the Glasgow young woman who met an ISIS fighter online. She too was stopped,
but she was fighting as a woman. She was fighting, like guns and fighting, right? And so that was interesting. That's not exactly what I was thinking happens to a lot of these women that would go. I just assumed that they would be brides and stay at the camp or whatever they do. I mean,
well, apparently it's okay to join in the fight. Maybe they're taking after one of my favorite historical characters, actually, in Islam is the young Aisha, who was actually quite the politician, quite the exegete, and also quite the military leader. She was a young woman, but had great appeal to the masses. And it's really interesting because the radicals appeal to Aisha as why women should be in the home and they shouldn't have any rights. And then also the liberals appeal to Aisha as someone who had more rights than a lot of Muslim women have today. So she's a really interesting character, but we'll have to do a whole different podcast just on Aisha.
Right. So there was also the 3 Denver girls.
Yes. Teenagers again.
Yeah. Two of them were 15 and the oldest was 17.
They skipped school
to join ISIS.
Got on a plane to join ISIS and were stopped in, what was it, Germany?
Yeah, in Frankfurt. They had made it all the way to Frankfurt, and they had $2,000 cash.
Yeah, and they were turned in by their parents.
Right,
Mom found out what was going on,
Right.
and don't mess with Mama. She found out what was going on and turned her daughters in. And so who knows how this is going to go forward with a trial, because these are, some of these are teenagers.
Well, actually, I think they were taken home. They were met by the FBI. They were taken home, interviewed, or I guess interrogated and released. But
because they're underage, I don't know that we'll find out exactly what will happen proceedings wise. Those court documents, I think, have a different protocol.
Right, but what was really interesting is that another person was on his way to join ISIS and got got caught and was brought back, and he ended up actually killing or I don't. It didn't say if he was killing, but it was a soldier that had a man who had run over two soldiers.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
And that was in Canada.
Yes.
And so. And then he came and they ran off his car and he landed in a ditch. And when he came out, I guess he still continued to resist and he was shot dead.
And that on top of the news of the Canadian terrorist act where someone came out Muslim and killed one soldier at least, and also had ties to wanting to join ISIS. So in some sense, I wouldn't say this is an epidemic because we're looking at a handful of people, but it's enough to be concerning.
Well, the thing that I find really, really interesting is that it's happening, like this was like within a couple of weeks. All of these were like within a couple of weeks from each other. And so it wasn't like it was, like once a year or twice a year, but it just seemed like it was just all of a sudden the media was inundated with all of these stories of this random people that weren't really, to be honest, tied with ISIS in a way that was being supported by an ISIS group. They were just guys that converted to Islam, maybe through propaganda online like we were talking about, and then all of a sudden decided to act.
Right. No, you have a history of it's a small history, I guess you could call it a history of Americans engaging in terrorist activity. You have Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed by a U.S. drone strike in Yemen. He was an American citizen, was teaching at a mosque in Virginia. You have Nidal Hassan, who was responsible for killing people at Fort Hood. You have Faisal Shahzad, Pashtun American that was attempted to blow up the New York Times Square. And you have, of course, the most recent Boston bombings of the Sarnoff brothers, who also had connections with Al-Qaeda, possibly in Dagestan. So it's, you have all of these things happening, but they were pretty spread out. This is the time where it seems like a lot of things happen in the last few weeks. So it is interesting, but we have to take it in context. And I think that's what we want to do here today. We want to talk a little bit about the context of this, because what you don't want to do is go home and say, hey, there's this huge problem. We have, all of these teenagers joining ISIS and wanting to commit acts of terror on our own soil.
Right. Something that you and I had to look up, just to kind of be clear, because we're talking about terrorism a lot. So we looked up the definition, the FBI's definition. It defines terrorism as the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. So these homegrown guys,
right,
gals, would you, like for the guy that the Parliament shooting, right? He wasn't a part of, a terrorist group.
I think in his mind he was. And I think that does matter. I think in his perception, in his own imagination, he was doing this on behalf of ISIS. I think that does have some value to look at. Whether or not ISIS will claim him, or it's kind of, they seem like a pretty open group.
Right. Anybody that's willing to commit atrocities.
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, just come on in.
But you're right. They didn't have any support necessarily. Wasn't necessarily a part of ISIS. But I think in his own mind he was, and that does matter. But I think the bigger question for me, Howard, is the whole. I think it was originally, I couldn't trace back the original person. I've heard this statistic thrown around a lot, and that is that 10% of the Muslim world are radicalized. And I've even heard people say, well, 10% of Muslims are terrorists.
Right. And, Sam Harris, Bill Maher, that whole debate thing, they had thrown around numbers like that, the core of Islam. Right. And being extremists and terrorists and such. And that was interesting. I would like to see more of that, or to find out where they're kind of getting that stuff from too. Well,
I look back, I did find where Glenn Beck a few years back had said 10% of Muslims are terrorists.
Okay. And what was that from?
Well, you can just throw a stat. Oh, you mean what show was it on? It was on his radio show.
No, where did Glenn Beck get that?
I have no idea. Couldn't figure it out.
But
Fareed Zakaria, Fareed Zakaria on, I think it's CNN. I can't remember the broadcast that he works for, but he kind of called him out on it and did the math and said, so what you're really saying is that we have 160 million terrorists walking around. That would be 10% of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world.
Right.
So according to Beck, we have 160 million terrorists.
And just kind of give you context, I mean, the U.S. is around 300 million. So half the population of the U.S.
are terrorists.
Wow.
And if you think about in the United States, depending on whose statistics you read, I like vetted research organizations like Pew. I'll go with their statistics. We're looking at 3.5 million Muslims in the United States.
Okay, 3.5 million Muslims, not terrorists. Muslims, okay? Go for it.
I guess it depends who you ask. But
right.
Yeah, no, I would say 3.5 million Muslims in the United States. And so if you were to argue that 10% of those folks were terrorists, then yeah, I could understand the mass hysteria about Muslim terrorists, because it would be an astronomical number. But the bottom line is what we have is a handful of Americans engaging in these activities. A handful.
Okay. So give me some numbers.
Well, we just went over the ones from the last week, and then we talked about a couple others that have happened in the last few years. But I mean, let's assume, I'm going to go big here and say, let's say 35. Let's say we have 35 people that have engaged in terrorist activity from the United States that are Muslim. What would that be? 0.00001%
of Muslims
in America
that are terrorist.
Of the 3.5 million Muslims, it would be the 0.00001%.
Wow.
And if we were just to look at this idea of teenagers leaving and engaging and joining ISIS, I mean, that is obviously concerning, especially for the parents, no doubt about it. But let's put it in context. We have 3 teenage girls and what was the other American? The teenage boy out of Chicago. So we have 4.
Right.
And so far, I'm not saying there won't be more, but we have 4.
Right. That kind of reminded me of there was this chart I saw on Facebook that kind of cracked me up, but it was like about the Ebola outbreak in the U.S.
I love the term even outbreak.
Right. It was like one, at the time, it was like one person. And it was just, they basically drew these little, stick figures, and there was like, 300 million of them. And so you just had to continually scroll. I mean, like, it was literally like maybe like minutes and minutes of like scrolling till finally you got to the one red stick figure. It's like, that's what's really going on. And
that's the outbreak.
Yeah. And so you have here with these terrorists, so-called terrorists in the United States, if it is 35 out of 300 and some million people, and out of 30, what did you say?
3.5 million. Now that's a conservative statistic. Most of the people that are trying to convince everyone that there's terrorists possibly living next door to you, they're using statistics of like 7 million, 9 million Muslims living in America. Even those statistics are inflated. And I mean, realistically, we have 3.5 million Muslims in America. It's not even that large of a population segment. And of that 3.5 million, so far, we've had 4 people, teenagers, be convinced online that they should be a part of ISIS. Now, that's concerning, those 4, and that could easily become more. But to make it out to be this huge issue of homegrown terrorism, I think is a bit of a stretch.
Right. We kind of came into this story because the same friend that I had talked to about ISIS and the bullet and the sharing the gospel with him, he had kind of mentioned that, because I had kind of explained how much the FBI really does know. I mean, like we kind of try to laugh at our government and say they're bumbling, but the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people on Homeland Security that are looking at these guys that are terrorist threats. And so that led us in our conversation to the next thought, which was, what about the guys that aren't on terrorist watch lists, that are just under the radar and they convert to Islam, kind of like what we're seeing in these stories that we brought up, and then show up and do some crazy, attack.
That'd be like the guy in the I think, what was it, a chicken factory? He was fired and went back and decapitated a woman in Oklahoma.
Right.
That's a good example there. So what do you do with that? Are we going to see more of that going on? And I think, it's really hard because, Howard, we're in the first time, I think, this generation is seeing acts of violence all over the world, all happening at once. And it's really easy to believe that we are, like, the wheels are just coming off.
So you're saying that because, in the United States, we're so sheltered from that kind of thing?
No. I'm saying that we are way overexposed to that sort of thing.
Oh, right. Because we're able to see basically the entire world and everything that's happening all at once because of media, because of internet, because of globalization.
So I think if you were to just try this, if you're listening, try this. Of course, if you try it, you're listening. Find somebody and just ask them, if you were to say, society today, global society, is 10 being the most violent society the world's ever seen, 10 being the most violent society history's ever seen, and 1 being the most peaceful society history's ever seen, what do you think it is? And I have a feeling that most people are going to say, oh man, we're up there, 8, 9, maybe 10. The world is coming off, the wheels are coming off, the world is falling apart, everything is in chaos, there's death, there's murder everywhere. We've got ISIS, we've got Al-Qaeda, we've got Hezbollah, we've got Hamas, we've got Boko Haram, we've got all of these groups, and oh my goodness, and it's nonsense.
Yeah, I don't know if we even... It almost becomes like this subliminal thing because, to be honest with you, when I watch Fox News or CNN, I kind of get a headache because like there's so much information coming and it's all terrorizing as far as their tempo and the way they're speaking. It's always urgent and
I feel like Howard's being terrorized by the news,
and it's always like so worrisome. And then when it's just even if it's just about a politics between candidates, there's always this shouting and yelling, and I'm just like, I can't handle this. This is way too much. So, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think people can oftentimes when they, especially when they watch the news, and then of course the news, even the newspapers. Like, do people read those anymore? But the headlines, these gigantic, like Ebola, outbreak in the U.S. and. Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. I think, I would agree probably if this...
But I'm sure there are some of you out there thinking, what do you mean nonsense? It's not nonsense. The world is falling apart. The wheels are coming off. Those are real things. And you're right. They are real things. There are serious threats around the globe. But let's take it in the context of global history. I think a lot of...
I was just going to say Rome. Assyria.
Not just
Babylon.
Rome. Let's consider... pre-modern society. Let's consider tribal societies where most archaeologists, most anthropologists would say that the chances of you dying at the hands of a violent death by another man are like 15%. And you might think, well, that's not that high. That's extremely high, especially when you consider your chances today of dying at the hands of another man. I'm talking globally, not just you as an American. Globally, the chances of a human dying at the hands of another human are less than 1%.
That's encouraging.
It's way encouraging, and it should give us a context for how we watch these things and how we see. Is the world really coming apart at the seams? Are the wheels really coming off? Is it as bad as we actually say that it is or believe that it is? And I say no.
Right. And, I tend to feel like where we're going at with whenever we bring up media or anything that's kind of inflammatory, it's the idea that we're not interested in fueling that panic because I don't think that's actually good for anybody. and just the idea, right? I mean, just
anything that starts with fear, I would say, okay, take a step back, ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Do I have all of the facts? Have I really considered
Is this legitimate?
Let me look at it as a whole, not just this one incident, and then try to make an entire. You know what it is? I've got it. I was
bring the noise.
I don't know what to call it.
Ooh.
No.
Okay, wait for it.
Chicken Little history.
The sky is falling.
The sky is falling. Chicken Little history. Like we actually believe everything is falling apart right before our very eyes. And you know what? It's because we, as probably the first generation, can see everywhere the world is falling apart right before our very eyes.
Right.
But the reality is this is probably, I'm saying probably, I don't want to say it is, even though I think it probably is. I think this is probably the most at peace the world has ever been.
Right.
That's insane to think about because we don't feel that way.
Right. Didn't you pull up some statistic on how crime is just continually dropping?
Yeah,
in the
violent
US?
Crime is on its way down, and globally, not just in the U.S. Now, obviously, if you're living in Syria, it certainly doesn't feel that way. And because of how much we watch the news, it sometimes feels like we're living in Syria. If you're living in Darfur, it doesn't feel that way. If you're living in, say, the Congo, it doesn't feel that way. But you have to have the context of global history. We see decapitations, we see people being tortured, and we're appalled. But go back a few hundred years, go back 1,000 years, and this was entertainment.
Right.
And
where
so
the people would gather around the guillotine as someone is being beheaded.
Yeah, and so we have to
to
completely look at it in the context of global history and say, hey, let's not assume that our world is the world. Right? There was a world before. There's a history. God has been at work from the very beginning, and we don't need to be these sort of Chicken Little historians or Chicken Little theologians that walk around thinking the world is falling apart, especially if it isn't.
Right. And I think the danger is the reactionism, the reactional mindset where everybody, and this reminded me of 9/11 when George Bush had basically declared war in response because they felt like something had to be done. They didn't have the facts. They didn't have everything together, but something had to be done. And that's very reactionary. That I really believe that gives power to the others that have done that to us. So like you have ISIS attacking us, right? So our natural response is to attack them. It kind of forces our hand when we are reactionary rather than taking things aside and saying, okay, how do we respond? How do we educate our people? How do we use rational thinking, logic? How do we bring all of these things in to make the best decision for the long term? Because really what happened to Iraq after we invaded? Now that we've let it go and, we've left, ISIS comes in.
There's
it's
a
like
vacuum.
this vacuum, right?
That's
Exactly. Right. And so has it been the best decisions? Have we been making? And I'm not saying that we need to get into politics on this show. That's not what we're talking about. But just the idea that we need to be rational, that we need to be at peace.
We need to have common sense.
That we need to make good decisions, not reactionary decisions, but good decisions on their own.
I'll give you an example of reactionary, and that's Anders Breivik, right, in Norway. Mm-hmm. 77 people killed in a single day.
Wow.
Trying to protect Norway from Islamization. That's not what we want. And he's doing all of this, according to Anders Breivik, in the name of Jesus. That's so disturbing.
Right.
It's a new crusade, and I think that we have to be so careful to make sure that we don't even for a second begin to think in those terms. That is a scary thought that this man believed wholeheartedly that he was working out the will of God through the death of these teenagers.
77 teenagers.
Now, what's just to give it context, that's way more people. Like since 9/11, we think about how many people have died at the hands of Islamic extremists. It isn't 77. Since 9/11, I mean, I don't even know the numbers off the hand, but I know it's not 77. We've got a couple Fort Hood. What was the Fort Hood numbers? I can't remember.
I don't have those
exactly. I think it was 13. 13 killed. That's right. 13 killed at Fort Hood. Faisal Shahzad, actually, his bomb didn't even go off. Man, I'm just trying to think of all the terrorist activity, but it's a handful, really. And when we look at the statistics, I think we'll be surprised that terrorist activity is actually on its way down in the United States. It kind of had a little bit of a spike after 9/11, and then it started to decline. And so on average, it's less than 20 less than 20 people are arrested, and we'll put all the sources for this. This is out of a research project that was done at Duke University. Less than 20 people are arrested on average for links with terrorism. And I don't even mean they're committing terrorist acts. For links with terrorism, less than 20 per year.
Wow. That doesn't seem like that way on the media.
No, because we think, well, 10% of Muslims are terrorists, which is so bizarre that we just kind of take that hook, line, and sinker. We've got, almost 10 million in the United States. Also not true, but we take it hook, line, and sinker. And therefore, man, they're everywhere. And so you can imagine, I get it why people walk around so afraid. But I'm telling you, as we look at the media, yes, there was 4 people this week that were going to engage in terrorist acts. They are angry. They are looking for identity, and they did find a place to fit in an Islamic terrorist group. But that is 0.0000, actually got to add a 1% of the Muslim population.
Right. And you had said something that we were talking about before the show about them finding a place and how compelling that was. And we talked about this on an earlier show, but just basically, what do you think that is such a draw, I guess, for them to, because really you're thinking if you just think about it, how much of a sacrifice it is to leave your family, right? To go to a brand new place, to join up with people you don't really even know, and to fight, to lay down your life on their beliefs. So, well,
a lot of these especially the teenagers, they're angry, but that doesn't make you a terrorist. Almost all, Howard, you work with a lot of youth. A lot of teenagers are angry.
Right. And they're looking for a way to
fit, a place to belong, a place to separate from, I'm no longer my parents' kid. I want to be my own person. And so,
and they want to believe in something. I think that's this generation's
looking
mark.
For something to believe in.
They want to believe in something that's beyond themselves, because I think they do find that at least the more thinking or a more aware or self-aware these students are, they're finding that the world is offering really shallow things. I think like it's no longer the world of Britney Spears and pop culture and like even it's even hipster to be aware of social issues and what's going on in the world. So, like I can see this shift with young people, but at the same time, we're seeing that it's leading to some extremism,
And not only that, but I think we're actually perpetuating the problem.
How so?
With media, with these sort of overarching, sweeping, generalized statements about Muslims and immigrants.
Right. They simplify it to the point where it's like, this is wrong, this is right, and it's not really this robust, thought. It's much more complicated than what we portray it as. But the media just kind of makes these sweeping statements
That's right, and we know researchers have they've looked at sort of the psychological things that go on with an immigrant, and especially when their ethnic identity or their religious identity has any kind of hostility towards it, whether it's real or perceived. And I would say in this case, it's quite real.
Right.
So people that have a real or perceived hostility from the host society, the place where they've immigrated, about their ethnicity or even their religion, they start to really they take one of two routes. One, they completely deny or downplay their own ethnic or religious identity,
right,
so that they can kind of fit.
Right. They become enculturated. That's their goal.
Right. And then you have the other guys that are they might actually begin to assert pride in their cultural group. They might assert pride in their religious identity as a way of dealing with this hostility.
Right.
They actually become more Muslim than they were before they got here. They become more, whether it's a national identity, Pakistani, or more of an ethnic identity, whether it's Pashtun or some other ethnic group. So they become a more of what they were before they even arrived to the United States.
Right. So they consciously separate themselves from the host country.
Right. They have no idea or desire to become like everyone else. And so what ends up happening, the pressure that they feel from the host society, according to this particular research document, it says that the pressure to assimilate and give up one's sense of ethnicity, it may actually result in anger, depression, and in some cases, violence.
There's the word.
So it doesn't matter if you're a Hispanic immigrant, a South Asian immigrant, a Korean immigrant, does not matter. If you have that overwhelming sense of a hostility or a perceived hostility, it puts you into a really tough spot. And I think that we perpetuate this by forcing Muslims to kind of choose sides. Like, hey, you're Muslim, that means this. And it's oversimplified, and it actually ends up creating a bigger problem.
The tough thing is it's a societal thing, though, right? I mean, we have, as a people, we have responsibilities, and we've, I think, dropped the ball. Kind of like when last week when we were talking about Dave Cash and when he was sharing about how Americans have kind of lost that deep sense of hospitality. You know, that's a societal thing. And so here, you know, we're treating Muslim immigrants a certain way, right? Out of fear, out of reactionism. It kind of reminds me of the Japanese concentration camps in the U.S. during World War II after Pearl Harbor. You know, it became this very much, if you're Japanese, you know, you're anti-American, when a lot of these Japanese have just grown up in the U.S., were born and, you know, maybe a few generations. And so you have Muslims that kind of fall and fit into that bill or have a real desire to connect with American values and or consider themselves Americans or are Americans themselves, but are still being, you know, judged and
I mean, harassed. Yeah. I mean, that's the bottom line. I've experienced this myself with Muslim friends that I have, where I've thought, you know what, I'm going to your school and I'm going to talk to your teacher because that's not right. Where they have experienced, poor treatment because they're Muslim, even just joking. And one teacher even joked to a young Muslim girl that my wife is really good friends with. She was 16 at the time, joked with her on the death of bin Laden. And she thought, I don't even know anything about bin Laden. I don't know why he's joking with me about this stuff. And I thought, well, there you go. That's a good way to really kind of perpetuate a problem of young teenagers wanting to fit somewhere. There she is trying to fit in an American high school. And here is a teacher actually making jokes, cracking jokes about her and bin Laden. That, in my mind, just doesn't make any sense.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, it happens.
That's horrifying. And I feel like it happens way more than anyone ever would think about. I understand like Bill Maher and those guys, you know, that are chomping at the bit, and then Ben Affleck saying, these liberals are just all for, Bill Maher saying the liberals are too soft on Muslims. But I don't think that this kind of prejudice is coming to the forefront. I don't think people realize how difficult it is to be a Muslim in our country that have no association with terrorism, that have no desire. They just want to eat sandwiches.
There you go.
Right? But at the same time is being pushed in this boat. And I can see how a 16-year-old kid who, you remember what it was like being 16. There's a lot of it's a tumultuous time where you're trying to figure out who you are and what it is to be a man, who it is, what it is that you believe and how you're going to live your life and the fears and the hopes. And then all of a sudden you get hit by ISIS propaganda. Then all of a sudden you're a bride or you're a soldier that's trying to get somehow to Syria or to Iraq to help and fight, because that's the only place that you've actually felt like you belonged and could do something bigger than yourself. Because you're jaded, you've lost hope, and
I think for us, we have to realize that Muslims, they're just people. They have the same heart as you and I. They're just people who happen to be Muslim. We have to stop viewing them through this sort of religious identity that their religion is everything about them. That's way oversimplified. We need to actually look at them as people who happen to be Muslim and allow them to define themselves.
Right.
Yeah. There was a recent, it's not too recent anymore. I think it was 2011, where they did a survey of Muslim Americans. And I found this fascinating because recent polls are saying that the amount of Americans that are angry with the U.S. government, they're like at an all-time high. I mean, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, it's just at an all-time high. In 2011, it was high as well. But nowadays, it's at the highest that it's been in a while. But this particular survey, Muslims that were angry with the U.S. government, was lower than the general public.
What?
Yeah. The general public was more angry with the U.S. government than the Muslims were that are living in the United States. The satisfaction of Muslims living in the United States, where they say that they are satisfied with the way things are going in the United States, 56%, and the satisfaction of the general public was 23%. So if we're going to just look at and base it, because I think Glenn Beck was making his comments about terrorism, saying, well, those who are angry with the government. According to recent polls, we got a lot more terrorists than he realizes.
Right,
They're just not Muslim.
Right. That's a whole nother problem. Truth about Americans. Just
yeah,
kidding.
no,
Just kidding.
it's something to consider though, because I think most Muslims are incredibly satisfied with their life here in the United States. They feel like they're really blessed to be here, and they're happy, and they feel like the government that they have here is a very good government, and a lot of it's because of where they've come from.
Right. They've experienced the horrors. Right. What would be awesome though is if they experienced how we as Americans can be. You know, I think hands down, I think America is one of the most generous countries ever. Any situation that happens, if you look at Haiti, where tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of volunteers come and help over the course of the next years. Katrina. Hurricane Katrina, that is, and all of the any kind of thing that has happened, America just jumps in and helps, and foreign aid and on as the general population of the people. But we have to stop thinking in terms of just bunching these people together and making them all out to be the same. America has been this amazing melting pot of people, where we're becoming more and more multicultural. We can't stand together if we are continually fighting amongst ourselves. We learned that from Islam, actually from Muslims.
That's right, yeah. On a more positive note, in that same survey, 48% of Muslims said that they felt like they had a friendly response from Americans since they have come here as immigrants. So that was good. That's
so awesome.
Let's hope that the Christian church, it's much, much higher than that. But just let me run through a couple of these stats before we go to our next section.
Okay.
You guys will find this really interesting. What percentage of Muslims recycle?
What?
75%, as opposed to other Americans, 76%.
Wait.
No, this is really in the survey.
Okay.
All right, percentage of TV watchers. Howard?
50%.
58%. The average Americans, 62%.
I didn't know it was that low.
Yeah, I would have thought higher. I guess
Right.
it's internet TV. It's changed everything. Regular use of
Netflix.
social... All right, here we go. Regular use of social networking. Let's go with the Muslim population, Howard.
85.
57%.
Oh, man.
Now, this is a little older, though, 2011, so I'm assuming it's grown. And Americans, 44%.
What?
Yeah. All right, regularly watch pro sports.
25%.
48%, and Americans, 47%. They're way more into the NFL than we are, 1%.
Wait, how do you know it's the NFL?
I'm sorry, I used the word they.
They
It just says pro sports.
It's
the only pro sport on in America. I mean, really.
Because I know Koreans, we are wild about archery. You saw that in the Olympics.
Oh, my goodness. All right, display the American flag. What percentage of Muslims display the American flag?
I'm going to say 75%.
44%.
Okay, that's pretty reasonable.
Percentage of Americans that display the flag?
This is a trick, isn't it?
No. 59%.
Oh, what does that mean? Display it like on their front porch?
I think so. Maybe a bumper sticker would count. I don't know.
Oh, a bumper sticker. Clothes.
I think it's probably... I'd have to look at the question, the way it was worded. Pew's really good about giving their questionnaires and how they ask. All right, and so our final one. Are you ready? Percentage of Muslims that regularly play video games.
25%.
18%.
Oh,
and the general American public, 19%.
Are you serious? Gamers only 19%?
19%.
They're all in my youth group. I'm pretty sure.
You're
all
Asian.
19%.
Those of you that didn't know, Howard is Asian.
I am Asian. Can't you hear it in my voice?
So we've got 18 and 19%. And the point is, they're not so different. Come on, people. They're people that happen to be Muslim, and we have to stop defining everything they do based on their religion. And you can learn a lot from just asking people about themselves. So anyway, I thought that survey was really, really informative.
And fun.
And fun.
And fun. All right, so our next segment is Boom Goes the Dynamite.
Boom goes the dynamite.
And the person that gets that this week is Representative Joe Wilson. Tell us what he said,
from
Trevor.
South Carolina, Representative Joe Wilson.
You didn't have to say that because we're from South Carolina, but now everyone knows.
No, they know. I mean, they're going to look it up. I mean, I don't the exact quote. I don't have it in front of me. Howard, do you have it?
I do.
Go with the exact quote.
Do you want me to do it with a Southern accent?
Do you have a good Southern accent?
Of course I do. Tell you what, I am
That's
Asian, but I was raised in the South.
That's not quite Southern. With the Southern, you got, especially if you're in politics, you got to have like a little bit of molasses falling out of your mouth.
Right, that's the old country.
Old Southern.
Yeah, Southern.
Actually, I am from the South, but I don't have a Southern accent.
You're from Florida. That's not the South.
Hey, that's the South. I'm from the Panhandle.
No. That's New Jersey.
Panhandle. That's
New,
the South.
That's New Jersey imported down to the South.
All right, give it to us. What does he have? Give us the boom goes the dynamite.
All right, so basically, here it is. Okay, well, part of their creed, they're talking about ISIS.
No, he's talking about Hamas.
Oh, Hamas, you're right, thank you. Would be to bring persons who have Ebola into our country. So he believes that part of their terrorist attack would be to take people that are infected with Ebola and send them through Mexico into our nation.
He actually, this is, in my mind, the ultimate boom goes the dynamite because it's the trifecta. He brings up Hamas, so he's talking about Hamas and Israel.
Right.
So he's got Israel in there. He's talking about Muslims because Hamas is a Muslim group, too. And then he brings up, oh man, he's got 4. He brings up Ebola, which is like number 4 or 3 there. And then with number 4, he brings up the border. Immigration. This is the ultimate sort of
quadfecta.
I don't know what you would call that. It's the trifecta plus 1.
Right.
Yeah, so he's talking about Hamas going over and I guess volunteering without the hazmat suits and willingly infecting themselves. It just sounds, I get where he's coming from. He's saying that they're willing to die and this and that, but I think he's really, honestly, I think he forgot the name of the group that he was going to say, and he just threw out one that came to his mind, Hamas, because Hamas is primarily Palestinian, and they're fighting for land in Israel. I'm not so sure they're that busy. Focused. Yeah, so they got their own thing going on. But then infecting themselves with Ebola, coming through the south, through Mexico, man, he kind of hit on everything there, and so it was an ultimate, really just political move.
Right, he drank the Kool-Aid of the media.
So,
or as Shepard says, Shepard Smith.
Yeah,
we almost forgot about that.
No, because he's our Seize the Day, our Carpe Diem Award.
But I love that he has this voice of reason, and he calls out that kind of behavior from the media. Tell us, kind of give us a brief overview.
Well,
what
he calls it hysterical voices on the media.
He calls it irresponsible.
Yeah, irresponsible reporting, hysterical voices. Essentially says, I'll just be summarizing here, but we'll put the video in the show notes, and you can go and watch it yourself. But what he says is, hey, there's an election coming up. Everybody has an agenda here, and so the party that's in power has to let you know that they're protecting you. The party that's not in power has to show you how the party in power is not protecting you. And Ebola has become the political pawn of the day and just calls everybody out. I was shocked.
Right. He did a great job, too. He was real straight, and he was just basically saying, hey, this is not what it seems.
Yeah. He said, there's no nonsense here. There is no Ebola outbreak. And he goes through and gives the facts about Ebola. Tells everybody to calm down, don't be hysterical, don't pay attention to the hysterical voices on the media, and I was really encouraged by that.
Yeah, and then you got Joe Wilson.
Right. He didn't get the memo.
It's everybody. It's everything. We're all going to die. I mean,
mass hysteria.
Right. And he represents South Carolina. I'm sorry. South Carolina.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was the reason he gets and I'm not saying that we agree or disagree with anybody that we put on the show for the Carpe Diem Award or the Boom Goes the Dynamite. Maybe it's just a bad moment for one person or a really good moment for another person. I don't know what Shepard Smith has said in the past about Islam. I'm sure he may be a Boom Goes the Dynamite moment here later in the show. Right. I don't know.
We do not support everything he says.
Right. But that moment, we were encouraged by his speaking out against the mass hysteria and the using Ebola as a pawn in a political chess match.
Right. And we kind of tried to do that on the show too. Of course, our tagline, we want to educate people beyond the media. We don't want them just to swallow it, wholesale. And so it was kind of neat to hear him talk about Ebola that way. And of course, with our Boom Goes the Dynamite, it kind of just works perfectly because normally we really wouldn't probably talk about Ebola that much unless that did happen. Whatever Joe Wilson said did happen. I'm not saying it's going to, nor do I think it's likely, but we wouldn't talk about Ebola. And just kind of gave us an opportunity to do that.
Well, we could have, because there are some Muslims out there that are condemning Ebola because they said they felt like that everybody's accusing them of not, they were going to get blamed for Ebola. So there was like a Muslim group. It was kind of like a joke. They came out and said, we better condemn Ebola before we get accused of not speaking out against Ebola. So
right.
Anyway,
man. That's awesome.
But yeah, so let's go with our resource of the week. I want to talk to you guys about a book that came out. It was 2011, and this was kind of what got me thinking about the world in light of history, not just looking at what's happening in the media and assuming that the wheels are coming off. So Steven Pinker, psychologist professor at Harvard, has written a book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. Now, I'm going to just say right off the bat, obviously I don't agree with everything Steven Pinker has to say. He's not a believer. He's pretty critical of Christian beliefs in the Bible and talks about the violence of the Bible, I think in a very sort of a very biased way. But his statistics regarding violence and culture and violence in light of the 21st century is phenomenal and very interesting. And you have to consider what he's saying and say, maybe the world isn't as bad as I thought it was.
I've never even heard of this book. Where did you hear about this guy?
Well, he has a TED Talk as well.
Ooh,
those of you
TED
that don't
Talks.
like to read, that's me.
Right. And he's working on his PhD right now.
That's why it's going to take a long time to finish.
But
so,
TED Talks, yeah, you're right. That's a great alternative to reading.
Would it be wrong if I did my whole PhD on TED Talk videos?
Would it be wrong? It depends on the school.
I don't know if I'd graduate. I'd have to talk to my advisor about that. But anyway, he has a TED Talk. Steven Pinker, he's also been on NPR a few times. He's got a few...
Two-time Pulitzer Prize winner. Oh, finalist, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And, he's from Harvard, so I think he's been vetted.
Right. And he has awesome hair.
He does.
Long, large, curly, fro-ish.
Locks of hair. But anyway, check out the TED Talk. Check out his book if you have time. I think it will be encouraging, because the bottom line, as believers, we should be the first and foremost people to recognize when things are not bad. We should be looking for opportunities to see where God is moving. We should be looking for opportunities to see the image of God in humanity. And I fear that we have lost that.
Yeah, that's tough. I don't know. I just feel like in the media, it's really hard to keep that face. So I think you're right. I think we have to be extremely intentional, without losing hope, because I don't think that Christ left us on earth at this time to make people scared, but to actually be bringers of hope, right?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of different than what we've been known as Christians over history.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the exact quote that C.S. Lewis talks about. It's in Mere Christianity, but he says, here it is. So let's suppose one reads a story of filthy atrocities in the paper. Then suppose that something turns up suggesting that the story might not quite be true or not quite so bad as it was made out. Is one's first feeling, thank God, even they aren't quite as bad as that? Or is it a feeling of disappointment and even determination to cling to the first story for sheer pleasure of thinking your enemies are as bad as possible? And I think that concerns me. And I think C.S. Lewis, if he saw what we were doing today and the way that we were viewing the world and the way that we were looking at Muslims, I think that this quote would ring true today more than ever before. And think about the context of when Mere Christianity is coming out and these radio broadcasts during the war. And what he goes on to say is, if the second is true, in other words, if you think you're disappointed that you found out your enemies aren't as wicked as you thought they were, if the second then it is, I am afraid you are in the first step of a process which, if followed to the end, will make us into devils. You see, one is the beginning to wish that black was a little blacker. If we give that wish its head, later we shall wish to see gray as black, and then to see white itself as black. Finally, we shall insist on seeing everything, God and our friends and ourselves included, as bad, and not be able to stop doing it. We shall be fixed forever in a universe of pure hatred.
Wow. That speaks a lot to, I think, where we are today.
We need to be careful. We need to be the kind of people that when somebody says, look, the world is falling apart at the seams, the wheels are coming off, we need to be the people that say, it's not as bad as you say. God is still at work.
Right. And it's not the end.
And it's not the end. We need to stop with the Chicken Little history, Chicken Little theology. I don't know what we're going to call it, but I like Chicken Little.
It is. It's kind of cute. It reminds me of like Bugs Bunny cartoons. No, not Bugs Bunny. Looney Tunes cartoons when I was a kid. That was Chicken Little, right?
No, Chicken Little is when the sky is falling. The movie.
Yeah, but I think he was on there.
Oh yeah, I don't know about that. No, that's the
big,
Foghorn Leghorn.
Yeah, the big rooster. But there was a Chicken Little something in there. Never mind. Maybe
anyway,
it was just a show.
Howard's completely distracted. I don't know what he's thinking over
I'm
there.
out.
He checked out after C.S. Lewis quote. He had like a little moment. I heard him snapping in the corner like, ooh, jazz hands.
Anytime there's a good thought, we snap our fingers. So if you hear that, it's like a golf clap. It's like the golf clap.
That's right. You got to picture somebody in a poetry setting reading C.S. Lewis and going,
right.
Ooh, nice.
Right.
So anyway, that's our show for today. Let's not look for gray and try to make it black. Let's not be overwhelmed with the idea that the world is falling apart. Let's be truthful about what's really going on in the world, but let's have hope.
Right, and let's bring hope to others.
Amen.
And if you like this show, we'd love to hear about it. Any comments, questions?
Questions and answers. We can give questions, we can give answers. I don't know. We might not be able to give answers or questions. We might just ramble on.
Yeah. Well, we're going to try our best. That's what Trevor's saying. We're going to try our best.
Yeah, send in your questions, send in your comments, even if they're critical. We like critical comments as well. We need to start a whole section that says why I think you're wrong, Howard and Trevor.
Right. And
that would be good.
And we will read it and enjoy it. If you guys get personal, though, that's kind of messed up. Like if you say something against Asians, come on, guys.
Oh, that's messed up.
Come
or if
on,
you say
guys.
something against Howard's car, that fuchsia color that he drives.
It's Periwinkle.
Periwinkle.
I'm pretty secure in myself, so.
All right. Well,
all right.
Yeah, be sure to tune in again and be sure to spread the word. Truth About Muslims podcast.
Thanks for listening.